and humanness of our time. The modern, unbelieving secularists and humanists of our time. They believe that Christianity is the great danger to freedom and good government.
People who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God.
To buy. Welcome to Freethinking 101, a program brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. We are presenting a program that is unlike any that you have heard before. This program will test your knowledge and your philosophy and your ideas and help you to examine the cobwebs in the back of your mind. Tonight we have with us Jeff Hornback, who is a retired former leader of the Ethical Society of St. Louis. He has a PhD from Columbia University in philosophy and is an active member of the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. And Jeff is going to talk to us about the problem of evil. Jeff, just what is the problem of evil? I know there's a lot of evil around, and it's a problem. But
yes, the average literate person may be surprised as to what the problem of evil is traditionally in our culture. In Hebrew Christian religious tradition in particular, the problem of evil is this: how does it happen that in a world planned, created, regulated, supervised, looked over with care by an all-powerful and yet an all-caring and loving God, there is evil? Mm-hmm. And this, for you and me, I think, is no problem except how to create more good and diminish the amount of evil. But for the theologians, this is a great problem, and they've wrestled with it for centuries. That's what's called the problem of evil. How can there be evil in a world created by God?
Yeah, an all-powerful God. If there's evil, he created it. Or she,
well,
as the case may be.
There's hedging on this subject. And of course, Christianity and Judaism grew out of older religions in the Middle East, Egyptian religion, probably Persian, or what we would now call Iranian religion, the religion of Zoroastrianism. And you know, Zoroastrianism, which is a very fine ethical religion, by the way, mostly found in the area of Bombay, India now, refugees from the Mohammedan invasions of Iran many centuries ago. But the Zoroastrians have a god of good and a god of evil, somewhat like the Hebrew Christian God and devil, but not quite. And the god of evil was called Ahriman, and though I haven't seen the label recently, a lot of people will remember the brand Mazda lamps.
Oh, yeah.
Ahura Mazda was the god of light, the god of light and the god of darkness. And many of the early religions had these two gods, one force. They personified good and they personified evil. So it traces back a long, long time.
They were able to account for evil because of a battle between
That's
the good
right,
and the bad.
a battle between the two forces. And of course, most of them thought that God, the God of good, was the stronger. But different cultures have different stories or myths. Even the traditional theologians call them myths.
Yeah.
Of things like the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You know, God had created a paradise, but he said to Adam and Eve, now there's one tree over there, the fruit of which you shall not touch. and that's been variously designated as the fruit of the tree of knowledge. When they got knowledge, that was evil, that was temptation. Many have interpreted it as sex, as symbolized by the serpent, and so forth. But when Adam was tempted and ate the fruit of the tree, it wasn't an apple, though in our English translations of the Bible we always say apple.
Yeah.
It was probably a fig or a pomegranate or something else. It wasn't an apple. But in eating of that apple, exerting his free will in an unsatisfactory manner, Adam fell. And American culture grew up on that saying from the old McGuffey readers, "In Adam's fall we sinned all." And that's what is known as original sin. I mean, it's built in. Sophisticated theologians these days say, well, that's just mythical. It means that whenever you choose, you're bound to make some mistakes. I would agree with that. I mean, that's a rationalist solution to the problem, that you're bound to make some mistakes, and there are bound to be conflicts which create this dualism, this clash between good and evil.
So how does this relate to a problem of evil from the Judeo-Christian viewpoint?
Well, we go on, of course, and the Christian section of the Bible, which we call the New Testament, as distinguished from the Hebrew Old Testament, provided the solution that God sent his only begotten Son through a union between the Holy Ghost and the Virgin Mary. And again, most ancient religions had this story of magical, miraculous birth of their God or their hero. And so Jesus, born of the Holy Ghost and the Virgin Mary, was sent so that human beings, by believing in him and following him, could be freed from their sins.
I see.
And there's another story, and I don't think the Bible or the Christian theologians bother to reconcile these very much. There was, of course, a court of angels in early biblical times, and Lucifer was the chief angel, the highest ranking angel. In other words, next to God himself. And but Lucifer was jealous, and he decided he would rather rule in hell than be a servant in heaven, which is practically a line from the 17th century English poet John Milton in his Paradise Lost. He said, rather rule in hell than be a servant in heaven. So another story explaining away the problem of evil in Christian terms, Hebrew Christian terms, is that the devil, or Satan, was really the angel Lucifer, and it was a battle in heaven over who was going to be top. And Lucifer lost, and so he went to reign in hell and create trouble for God and Jesus.
Well, this then would imply that God is not all-powerful.
Well,
if Lucifer can cause this mischief.
And that is known, again, using some of the technical terminology. There was an ancient sect, I believe in North Africa, called the Manichees. And the Manichean heresy was that God is a struggling God. He isn't all-powerful. He can't do everything he wants to do. And therefore, God needs our help. And that's been brought up to modern times. William James, the famous will to believe philosopher, who should have been an atheist, but he kept clothing things in theological terms, and his will to believe simply said that by believing these things, we make them come true. We make life turn out well if we believe the best outcome in advance. There's a lot of truth to that. That's another way of dealing with the problem of evil. Thinking it away.
Okay. There are some other arguments, I think, ways of trying to explain away evil. And I think there are, for example, natural catastrophes that we consider to be evil, and earthquakes and that sort of thing, volcanoes. And tornadoes. We just had one the other day in Kansas, a number of them, and a number of people were killed, and that's evil, or we see it as evil.
Well, in the purest passages in the two testaments, the Old Testament and the New Testament, some distinction is made, really, between what you would call the natural evil and a moral evil, which is an act of will. You know,
Yeah.
if I do you wrong, that's a moral evil. But if a tornado hits you, that's just a natural consequence. Although it's surprising how many people, you watch the TV news on recent storms and disasters, and you will see, let's say, a disaster in which there are almost no survivors. But those who did survive say, this makes me believe in God, or in the goodness of God. Well, why did God pick that person? And these issues are really best dealt with within one of the books of the Bible. The book of Job is really a classic for people who want to study the problem of evil, because if you're familiar with the story, Job was a very fine and prosperous man, hardworking, diligent. He had many flocks. He had a fine family, nice home, upstanding. That's right. And all of a sudden, catastrophes began to hit. His crops failed. His stock died. Misfortunes befell his children and himself. And he was sitting there, as they did in those days, mourning in sackcloth and ashes. And he was waited on by three friends. I don't remember which took which position, but Zophar, Eliphaz, and Bildad were Job's three friends. And one of them, I've forgotten which one, took the position that, look, Job, you must have sinned. See, this is the idea that these are retributions, or there would be rewards for good behavior. But tell me, Job, what did you do to deserve this? And Job said, I didn't do anything to deserve this. I've lived an upright life, been upstanding and so forth. And another friend urged him to curse God and die. I said, God's really pulled a dirty trick on you. Why should you worship him? And then a third, the voice of reason, I suppose you might say, said, just accept it. I mean, there is no connection between many of these catastrophes that hit us and our character, our sins. You're a good man, Job, and this is all undeserved. It's just the way things are. And I really feel that the freethinker or the rationalist meets tragedy and injustice and misfortune better than the typical true believer, because the true believer is troubled. How could God do this to me? And the freethinker says, God isn't doing this. Is a natural catastrophe.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I understand that some of the defenses that are used by the Christians are what we call Theodicies. What does that word mean?
Well, Theo, of course, is from God, or theology, and Dici is, say it right, justice. In other words, God and justice is implied in Theodicies. So that there have been many Theodicies. Now, that Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained by John Milton in the 17th century was one of the famous Theodicies in our tradition. The philosopher Leibniz, half a century earlier, he just lived over into the start of the 17th century, about 1610, he wrote one of the greatest Theodicies. And Leibniz, I was going to say invented, at least he first developed the idea of monads.
In his monadology.
You're a monad and I'm a monad in his monadology. And we're microcosms, and the mind of God and the universe is the macrocosm. And the microcosm, the little cosm, is synchronized with the macrocosm, or the whole universe. So his monadology reconciled everything. Another way of putting it by some people is that we have thoughts and so forth, and if we're doing right, we just think God's thoughts after him. And the famous Enlightenment skeptic Voltaire, who did the Candide play,
Right.
he panned the theodicy idea, especially the Leibniz idea, and he had Candide saying, "This is the best of all possible worlds, and everything in it is a necessary evil." So the theodicy guys are always trying to say, well, what appears to you to be evil, if you really had the overview, the view of God, you would see that it's all part of an infinite plan, it's all needed. And in the Christian and Jewish theologies, these are ways of testing your character and mine, you know. How could God know whether you were worth anything or not, worth eternal salvation, or maybe sending down to Lucifer for a little frying in hell? So they rationalize it pretty well. And
that reminds me of, you know, when our government or other governments want to go to war, they say, if you only knew what we know.
That's right.
And it's analogous to we don't really know what God has in his mind.
Well, as President Bush put it in the recent Gulf crisis, Gulf War, this is good against evil. And as Saddam Hussein put it to his people, this is good against evil. You know,
And they're both right.
They're both right in that sense. I'm not saying the two guys are on this exactly the same level morally, but we're all mixed bags of good and evil. And the idea of one tradition being put up against another as all good while the other is all evil is one of the unfortunate outgrowths of this kind of thinking.
Yeah. Maybe we could get into a little bit into popular theology and see how it's coped with this sort of problem.
Well, the absolute position that we've outlined here on the part of some might be characterized. I've heard preachers, theologians say, think of our earthly life as a rug. Viewed from above, you see the beautiful pattern, the colors, and so forth. Viewed from underneath, where we are, we see the warp and the woof and the tattered ends and ties and so forth. You know, so from God's point of view, it's all perfect, patterned, planned. And our vision is limited. Our finite vision is limited, so we don't see it. And then there are the ordinary salvationists who, of course, just take the view that we've got to side with good in God, or choose evil and go to hell. The only practicing absolute idealists in America or the world today, I think, are the Christian Scientists. And they genuinely take the view that there is ultimately no evil. Thinking makes it so. I mean, if we think error, then we are encumbered by and overcome by evil. But God is perfect, is complete, is infinite, is all loving, all caring, all powerful. And if you just think right, if you get on the right beam of thought, philosophy, commitment, then you can, in effect, do no wrong. Now, they admit that we're all mortal and we all finally fail in this test and slip. But that's the way Christian Science, for instance, meets this problem, that evil is an illusion or a delusion.
This is analogous to the philosophical idealists who think that it's all in our mind. Reality is in the mind, it's not out there.
Yeah. Well,
kind of thing.
And there have been other developments in modern times. I'm struck by a resurgence of the peace of mind, positive thinking type of philosophy. And that always shows up particularly in times of crisis. I remember early in my career, one of the first of the peace of mind books came out by Rabbi Joshua Loth Liebman, Peace of Mind. And Norman Vincent Peale was another one of the peace of mind, positive thinking people. I once went to hear Norman Vincent Peale. I couldn't believe what I'd heard on the radio. That was maybe even before the time of television. And I went to hear him speak at his marble collegiate church in the shadow of the Wall Street towers. And he preached on you and God, a powerful combination. And he told how on a recent day, some Wall Street brokers, big takeover artists, we would call them today, were just deadlocked in a deal. They couldn't see their way through. And they decided to go take a walk. And lo and behold, they walked by Norman Vincent Peale Marble Collegiate Church, and they walked in and meditated and prayed together. And then they went out, and his informant closed the deal with a $10 million profit. Tell me religion doesn't pay, said Norman Vincent Peale.
That reminds me of a little saying that the gospel according to Peale is appalling, and the gospel according to Paul is appealing.
It's appealing, that's right. Well, current representative of this type of thinking, slightly different style, is Robert Schuller and his glass cathedral. Have you ever seen that on television?
I've seen photographs
on
of
a
it.
Sunday morning. Well, it's vast and it's impressive. And he talks about possibilitarianism. I mean, if you think positive, if you act on the assumption that God is going to help you, then indeed you will succeed. Now, I believe in this kind of positive psychology, and yet I must say I'm somewhat lacking in some of the faith that makes it so foolproof for some people. I mean, I could not believe that success was inevitable, or that if you really got in touch with God, you would be empowered with divine and supernatural powers.
Would that be sort of the Pollyannish school?
That would be in part the Pollyanna school. Some of those people really grapple with tragedy. In recent years, a rabbi named Kushner, I've forgotten whether it's Harold or Howard, one of those names, maybe Harold Kushner. He's spoken here in the St. Louis area where we're doing this program. And Rabbi Kushner, who with his wife had a child with birth defects, I've forgotten what they were, Down syndrome or brain damage or something. The Kushners faced up to this tragedy, and so he did a book based on his own experiences, which he called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. I didn't hear him here. Did you hear him?
No, I didn't.
But he spoke here a couple of times in recent years, and his whole approach was that we just don't understand these things, and that somehow, even though he thought he was a good person like Job, he felt that somehow this this exceptional child had been sent as a lesson to him and his wife, and that somehow his belief in God was all the stronger. And this turns out to be comforting to great numbers of people. He's done a couple of sequels to that book. He's a popular lecturer, and people do it all the time, writing Theodicies, explaining. I've always enjoyed the poems of the British poet A.E. Housman, and as we draw near the end of this program, I think some of Housman may be in order. He is a skeptic and a little bit cynical, but a masterful poet. And in his book of poems called The Shropshire Lad, he tells about how his Shropshire lad goes to the fair in Ludlow and drinks Ludlow beer. And he has some wonderful lines, one of them, and malt, M-A-L-T, malt does more than Milton can to justify God ways to man. And then a few lines later, he says, look into the pewter pot and see the world as the world is not. Now, some people take to alcohol and drugs to get their theodicy, to see the world as the world is not, to gloss over evil. And my approach, and the approach I think of all reasonable, rationalist, free-thinking people, and this includes a lot more people in the churches than they're willing to admit, especially the professionals. Most of the professionals know better.
Right.
But they see that the real problem of evil is to try to strengthen and maximize and serve the goods, the values in life, and to reduce the conflicts, the interpersonal conflicts or the conflicts within the person, you know.
Right.
Try to strengthen those things and then try to work against the negative aspects, the things that cause conflict or cause pain, whether natural or moral. And to me, this is the real solution to the problem of evil. Serve the good, the values as we find them, and work against the evil.
I think we're really sort of just scratching the surface on this whole
This
issue.
might be, there's so many authors and illustrations and problems connected with good and evil that maybe we'll do a sequel someday on the problem of evil.
I think we have another minute or so if you'd like to sort of pull it together as a conclusion.
Yes. Well, I personally don't see any problem built into the universe, the problem of evil, which the theologian has.
Yeah.
I have no such problem. To me, sure, it's great to be alive. We're fortunate to have what I'm willing to call the gift of life, but let's put it this way, I see the gift of life as a gift of Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And we all personify things, but we don't supernaturalize nature by speaking of Mother Nature.
Yeah.
The gift of life allows us to pursue values. And to me, anything that anybody appreciates, no matter how selfish or short-sighted, is a value. The ethical, the moral question comes up when values conflict, when my values contradict yours or even contradict my own.
Okay, Jeff, I want to thank you very much for being with us, and maybe we can
do it
have
again
another
sometime,
session sometime. Those of you in our viewing audience, if you would like to respond to this program or comment on suggesting other programs for us, you can write to us at the Rationalist Society, Box 2931, zip code 63130. Or, if you wish to telephone us, our phone number in the 314 area is 298-6649. We would like to hear from you and answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.